Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's Kaffeepause, where we regularly check in with a journalist based in Berlin to talk about the news stories behind the headlines, and today is a big news day for German politics. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Anna Sauerbrey. She is foreign editor at the weekly Die Zeit and was awarded a Kellen Fellowship by the ACG in 2018. Anna, herzlich willkommen.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's always great to see you, and I'm delighted that we were able to see each other in person last week on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. But I'm even happier that you're with us today to help explain the German election to us, especially given how much is on your plate today. Let me maybe start by refreshing everybody's memory in terms of what the results of the election were. The Christian Democrats, the CDU-CSU, won 28.5% of the vote. This was up 4.4% from the last election in 2021. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany, came in as the second strongest party with 20.8%. This is double the result that they had last time around. The Social Democrats were down significantly from 2021. They got 16.4% of the vote. This was the worst result for the Social Democrats in the post-war period, and even the worst result since 1887, if one goes back really far in the history of this party. The Greens came in with 11.6%, down 3.1%. The Linkspartei, the left party, were at 8.8%, which is up almost 4 percentage points from 2021. And the Free Democrats came in at 4.3%, so they did not make the 5% threshold to be represented in the Bundestag. This is down 7.1% from the last election. And the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, the Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, came in at just 4.97%. And so as of now, they have not passed that threshold either. The day after the election, of course, each of the parties is very much involved with itself and is looking inward, thinking about leadership, thinking about partnerships. It seems relatively clear that Friedrich Merz of the Christian Democrats will be the next chancellor, and with 6 parties in the Bundestag, it looks like another gros coup or grand coalition between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats is likely. And we can get into a conversation about a possible coalition in just a moment, but I'd like to start by asking you, Anna, to share with us who you see as sort of the winners and losers of yesterday's election.
Well, yes, it's a question that seems quite easy to answer when you just look at the parties. I think the clear losers in this election are all 3 parties who participated in the previous government, all 3 traffic light parties, the Liberals, Greens, and the Social Democrats. They all lost massively in voter support, not all equally massively, but still all of 3 of them lost. Of course, the Social Democrats were first. They were the leaders of this coalition. Is the CDU a winner or a loser? Hard to tell. They got in with some 28%, as you said, Steve. But of course, they expected to have more. And that's what we hear from their ranks these days, is that people would have expected more, also within the party, also within the Bavarian branch of the CDU. And then there's some sense of disappointment that it was only 28 point something. The big winner, of course, is the AfD party. They got 20% of the vote, which is only the overall result. When you look at the Eastern regional results, it's even worse from a democracy perspective. They got close to 40% in all in Saxony, and Thuringia. And when you look at it at an even more granular level, you can see that they really have strongholds in some of the regions where they actually came in first, which is not that surprising looking at the regional elections we've had in the East last year, but still they massively outpaced the results they had back then. That is not to say that this is just an Eastern result. They couldn't have gotten 20% had they not been very strong in the West too. And there are some, they even came in first in some Western constituencies this time too, in formerly industrial regions like my home, the Ruhrgebiet, for example, in Gelsenkirchen. Which brings us to one big loser, I think, which is Germany's democracy. I think it's very dangerous that, particularly in the East, where the most radical AfD politicians live, where they have their strongholds, the party came in this strongly. And then I think when you like zoom out a little, I think it's also, I mean, Merz put it this way. He said that left politics are gone. And when you look at it through the right and left lens, you may agree. It's true that there is a massive majority today for both radical right parties and the Conservative Party and parties we cannot really place, like the BSW party, who's neither left nor right. I don't think that's the proper lens anymore, but I think we can say that progressive, forward-leaning, pro-climate policies, pro-transformation policies have been rejected by Germany's voters. Even if you don't put it in the left and right position, that is something we really have to realize. And this is also linked, I think, to a generation. In the last election, when Angela Merkel stepped down, younger politicians came in. They were Gen X politicians born in the late 60s and 70s, a generation that was very much formed through the years of the peace dividend after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. They came in with that massive transformative agenda. And I think this generation, along with their agenda, has now been rejected. And we already see, so to speak, the old guard coming back these days. We have Christian Lindner, who is one of these in this generation, who just stepped down. He might be replaced by Kubicki, who's, I believe, in his 70s too. Lars Klingbeil, the head of the Social Democratic Party, now wants to be the new leader of the party and also lead the caucus at the Bundestag. But it's still not clear that he will be the person. It might be Pistorius, who's in his 60s, or another person from the Social Democrats. And also Annalena Baerbock and Robert Habeck with the Green Party may play a lesser or no future role in politics, not at this level. So I think it's also a generation and an agenda stepping down.
It's so interesting to think about these generational changes, and we'll talk a little bit in just a moment about some of the personalities. But I want to come back to a couple of things that you touched on in your comment about the winners and losers. One, and I found that not that many people have been talking about this since the Ampel, since the Traffic Light Coalition collapsed on November 6th. The polls had been pretty consistent and had been putting the Christian Democrats at 30 to 32% of the vote. Of course, with 28%, it is far less than that, and it is much less than the 35% that Friedrich Merz had looked at to sort of try to bring back the party as a Volkspartei, as a catch-all party. So I think you're right in pointing out that even though the CDU came out as the strongest party, it's still not a clear victory for them on the level that they would have liked. How do you explain that?
I think several reasons. I think first, what we see is that pushing the topic of migration before the elections has not really helped Friedrich Merz. It may not have hurt him at the level that some have expected, but it has not helped him either. And I think it was a dilemma for the CDU because they were forced into it just by events. I mean, I think you always have to remember this also when you look at the AfD results. This was an election that, in the run-up to this election, had four attacks or terror attacks or assaults in Germany. Some of them really horrific, with 2 children dying, one in Munich, and the other also in Bavaria. It was really just a terrible time, and many of those, or 3 of those, were committed by asylum seekers in Germany from Syria, from Afghanistan, some of whom should have been long deported. So this, of course, was fodder on the AfD's side, and what the CDU did was to try to get on eye level with the AfD when it comes to a strong response and a very harsh response, even allowing the AfD to vote with them at the Bundestag. And I think it will, like, looking back, it will be very tricky for social scientists and scientists of political science to figure out what part this really played, how much it maybe was the candidate, how much it was the other world events that we have seen. I mean, these were just really eventful weeks leading up to this election, also with the Munich Security Conference and a complete reversal in the transatlantic relationship. So it's really hard to tell what part it played, but I think it once again showed that trying to level up with the extreme right on the topic of migration doesn't really help.
And I think one of the other topics that I want to touch on too is the left party. The left party had been polling consistently at about 5%, and there were questions as to whether or not the left party, as well as the Free Democrats and the Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, would make it in. But the left party really surprised a lot of people with nearly 9% of the vote. So significantly up from the last election, but significantly over that 5% hurdle. Can you talk a little bit about the role of the left party in the German political landscape at the moment?
Yeah, this is really an interesting phenomena because it shows that after everything that Friedrich Merz has said about left parties not having a big constituency in Germany anymore, or left politics having ended, which is, of course, partly true when it comes to transformational agendas. But I think the left has shown that if done rightly, there is a constituency for this type of party. And I think there are 3 reasons why they were so successful. The first, again, is Friedrich Merz's policy. And when you look at when really the surge in the polls started for the left, when they really got hope again to jump the 5% hurdle in the Bundestag, it was that week when Friedrich Merz voted alongside the AfD in the Bundestag. And I think there was a very strong response to this by many of the other democratic parties too, of course, and everybody mobilized for the big protests that we've seen afterwards in Germany. But it was really the left party who struck the tone and really appealed to younger voters, especially, and I think was able to mobilize those younger voters or draw them into their camp. And then, of course, there's the 5% magic. Once you appear to be over the 5%, or once the voters see the chance that they don't waste their vote, but that the vote really gets a party into the Bundestag, gets them a voice in the Bundestag, there is like a positive spiral running for that party. I think the second reason, and you see that here in Berlin, they were one of the strongest parties here in Berlin, is that younger voters who struggle with urban life and the cost of urban life went for the Linke party. They really they were strong on topics like rent a ceiling on rents in bigger cities, and rents here in Berlin and Hamburg and Munich have really exploded in the past years. And of course, the Social Democrats have offered policies for that too, but they haven't been that radical, and they couldn't because they were ruling alongside the liberals who have always rejected such policies. And of course, there was another gap, and that is being a pro-migration party, which none of the others, none of the formerly left parties, if you want to view it through that lens, both neither the Greens nor the Social Democrats are seen as pro-migration parties anymore. They have pretty much adopted most of the harsher suggestions of the CDU. And the only ones who really promote an open society, rather open borders, benefits for asylum seekers, a liberal asylum system, were really the left party. Yeah, I think that's pretty much.
So,
And I wanted to make a third point, and that's the social media campaign.
yeah.
They really had a really good and rather young frontrunner. And they were big on TikTok, and the others weren't.
Someone just submitted a question that follows up on this nicely, and writes, do you think that rather than a left-right division, we should be thinking about a split between those who are inward-looking and those who are open to globalization? Do you think that plays in as well?
Yeah, I think that's a new baseline where you can look at different types of policies. Though I think it's hard to tell, and maybe that's part of the reason why the Greens and the Social Democrats are not doing this well. It's hard to place them in pro-globalization or rather inward-looking scheme anymore, because as they have moved to the right, for example, on migration, it's hard to tell. On the other hand, they are, of course, pro-European, not nationalist. They're pro, or in a sense, they're fairly pro-world markets. So I think it's hard to place them in that scheme, and yet I think that's a better division than left-right to make.
Earlier, you said that one of the losers in the election was German democracy, and I at least was surprised to see how high the voter participation was at over 82%. Last election, it was 76%, so you see a significant jump between 2021 and 2025. I think the record was in 1987 when it was 84% voter participation. It seems to me that with that high level of voter participation, something is working right in democracy, right? But who do you think that high participation helped?
Yeah, I haven't seen any studies on that, so I can only make like an educated guess. And I really, maybe to correct that a little bit, I really don't want to paint a too dire picture here of Germany's democracy. Of course, I think it's great that so many people went to the ballot and cast their vote, and it is a record high. And I think it's good that people really grasp that this is a historic moment, that this is a very important election, that the next 4 years will be very significant. And I think that also speaks to that the media ecosystem in Germany works quite well, and that people were able to make an educated decision about their vote. And I also think that Germany is very stable in the respect that I take Friedrich Merz's word that the CDU will not form a coalition with the AfD. I just don't see that. I think what he did a couple of weeks ago you may like it or you may not like it, but it was really at a very low level of cooperation, if you want to call it that at all. And there will not be a coalition anytime soon with the AfD. So I think we may see lengthy coalition talks, but we will have a stable coalition in a few weeks in Germany again. So that's the good part. So I think it's hard to say who really benefited from it. I think the AfD in the past has, of course, like one of its largest constituencies is former non-voters. So I would assume that they did benefit from the high participation in this election. But that's also true for other smaller parties like Die Linke and like the BSW, who didn't make it into the Bundestag now, but who, of course, also mobilized some of the some of the people who did not go vote.
So since you were just talking about Friedrich Merz and sort of the options that he has, it looks as though a grand coalition between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats is most likely. Of course, there could also be a coalition of those two parties that includes the Greens as well. But I think the sense that I've gotten is that after the experiences of the three-party traffic light coalition, everybody wants to avoid another three-party coalition. And so the math works for a grand coalition. But Matz has really been talking about a Politikwechsel, right? Or a shift, a transition in politics. Do you think that that is possible in a grand coalition? Do you think he'll be able to sort of shift the policies in the directions that he feels that he needs the country to move in?
I think it depends on what area you look at. I think, first of all, I think speaking about a grand policy shift was somehow a trick he played in his election campaign. Because in some policy fields, when you look at migration, for example, he talked about having this grand shift in migration policies and really a new start and a new beginning for migration policies in Germany, finally do away with the Merkel years, the policies of open borders. But when you really look at what the traffic light government has done in the past years, you can see that they're closer together than Friedrich Merz might like. So we already have seen massive increases in deportations. We have seen deportations to countries that Germany in the past would have never deported people to, like Afghanistan, which comes at the cost of cooperating with the Taliban regime in some sense. We have seen cuts to aid to people, asylum seekers who live here. Many of the federal states or some of the municipalities have already introduced what we call Sachleistungen, so they don't get cash anymore, but asylum seekers are only getting like food stamps in order to sustain themselves. So there have been radical cuts, and of course the traffic light government also signed the very strict European asylum system reform in May of last year, which will go into effect in 2026. And of course, what a new coalition could always do is implement some of what is in that reform earlier in Germany. So they're free to do that. They could do that with the next Bundestag. And I think the same is, I think it's more difficult in the realm of the economy. Because there I see more of an ideological rift between the Social Democrats, who very much jumped onto Bidenomics and subsidizing certain industries, green industries in Germany, with a mix of incentives, but also like the end to combustion engines. They did support in Brussels at first with, I don't want to call it bans, but of course with that type of policy. And the CDU clearly who wants to go more to the free market side again and stresses that the economy itself has to decide what technologies they want to implement, also in order to get climate change under control. So they might clash over that. I think most importantly is that they have to get to a common position on security policies and most of all on how to finance security and defense policy. Because Friedrich Merz kept saying during the campaign that he does want to spend more on defense. And I think it's very clear that Donald Trump is going to demand that from Germany. But he claims that he can pay for that by cuts to other programs like social security programs, like the Bürgergeld. And the Social Democrats kept stressing that we need a reform of the debt brake in Germany. So I think that will be the most contested point and also one of the most important points.
I mean, you've started to touch on some of the sticking points in the negotiations for a new coalition, and I mean, I think one of the key issues is the budget, right? Because the last government basically collapsed over the budget negotiations for 2025, and so adopting a budget is crucial, and of course, as part of that is the future of the debt brake, and it seems as if it's high on the agenda that some sort of reform of the debt brake is necessary in order to, as you said, not only pay for defense, but also make investments in infrastructure and in a number of other issues that Germany is facing to try to sort of bring along the economy. How do you sort of see these sticking points on the one hand with Merz's goal on the other of quickly forming a government and making sure that this government is able to move forward? There's been some discussion about having the government formed by Easter, and yet some people think it could take much longer than that. I've heard different reports about what a coalition agreement could look like. That maybe it won't be as detailed as some of the coalition agreements that we've seen in the past, or maybe it sets the agenda just for 1 year as opposed to the entire sort of Amtszeit or legislative period. Can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing in this regard?
Yeah, I think it's still pretty early to say how long it's going to take. I think it also depends on the personnel that will lead those coalition talks. But I think you have raised the major points. It's like, will they really go through the normal process, which will take weeks, or will they try to take some shortcuts? And right now, I am fairly pessimistic from the few conversations I've had today and yesterday that they will agree on a short track. I think the Social Democrats do not really have an interest in that. They have massively lost in the elections. I think there's a lot of anger within the party, with the establishment, with Olaf Scholz and the heads of the party. And I think that this pushes the Social Democrats into a position where they will have to really make it painful for Friedrich Merz to join this grand coalition. Because you remember last time we had like a revolution in the youth organization of the Social Democrats who forced like a vote among the membership on the grand coalition. The heads of the Social Democratic Party were already toppled over this back then. And of course, this was Merkel. It was different times. It was before the war in Ukraine. So the outside pressure is much bigger right now. But I think there still is sort of some muscle memory in the Social Democratic Party that they just really don't like to be in a grand coalition, and now to be in a grand coalition as a much smaller partner, as having like only half of what Friedrich Merz had in the votes almost. So it will be difficult for them to be in it, to their own constituency, to their own members. And I think they have to show it by slowing the process down. And I mean, I'd be hopeful that with, it's both parties do have another muscle memory, and that's their Staatsräson, that they function well in situations of crisis. And we are undoubtedly in a situation of crisis internationally. So I do hope that they will be able either to pass some things in the Bundestag before the final coalition settlement is in. This could be, for example, Ukraine aid if needed. This could be agreements to decisions on Ukraine on the European level. And of course, there's always, as you mentioned, the option to have put some of the very granular stuff of the coalition agreement in brackets and do the big things first, which is the household. But I think that on the household, you cannot work with just a list of, 4 major points or something. They will really have to spell that out, and that will take time.
Yeah, I mean, it will obviously take time to work out the finances and to figure out those budgetary priorities. Earlier in our conversation, you talked a little bit about Lars Klingbeil and Boris Pistorius as sort of the new leadership in the SPD. Olaf Scholz was barely able to win his seat in Eastern Germany. It was one of the few electoral districts that was not won by the AfD. Scholz has said that he will not participate in coalition negotiations and that he does not want to take on a role in the new government led by Friedrich Merz. So he'll be sort of a backbencher in the next parliament. I've heard that Boris Pistorius, the current defense secretary, might become foreign minister and certainly likely to be vice chancellor, while Lars Klingbeil would take over the party leadership, although he seems to be keeping open a ministerial position as well. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how the Social Democrats are looking at the election results and drawing consequences from that?
Yeah, I think I was at the Willy Brandt House last night, which is the headquarters of the Social Democratic Party, and I think the very brief moment when the Social Democratic leadership stepped onto the stage really was like foreshadowing the next weeks. So Scholz almost held what was seen as a farewell speech. It was very brief. He alluded to his long almost 50-year membership in the Social Democratic Party and made it clear that he bears some of the responsibility. And I mean, he's not a very emotional person, but I think this was an emotional moment for him too. And then Lars Klingbeil stepped up and called for generational change, which was pretty much just a different word for I want to do it because I'm the next generation. And Boris Pistorius, because he's not part of the party leadership, was not on the stage, but stood on the sidelines and had to watch Klingbeil say this, while he himself, of course, has ambitions to be, for example, as you said, foreign minister. I think right now this looks like the sort of the natural division, but of course we don't know how. And it was hard to get a sense for that last night. We don't know how much unrest there is in the membership and the lower ranks of the party. I happened to stand next to a very young person who's like a local policymaker in Cologne, and he was really angry. And he called for all of them to step down, and he sort of said that to every journalist he got hold of that night. So I think, especially among younger members, they want real generational change, and they don't necessarily see Lars Klingbeil as part of that generational change. They might also feel forced to put any sort of coalition treaty or even the decision to pick up talks with the CDU to their membership. So there's a lot of contingency there that's just linked to the mood within the party. And the path you have sketched, Steve, is, I think, the one that's envisioned by the party leadership. That's the way they want to go. That's how they want to divide power up. But I think it's still an open question whether the party is going to go with that.
Mm-hmm. So we'll obviously have to follow that closely as well. There have been a couple questions that have come in about the AfD and then also about Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht. So I'd like to talk about those briefly and then maybe shift to foreign policy. The AfD, of course, came in second place with 20% of the vote. We've talked a little bit about the difference between East and West, that this was the strongest party in the Eastern states, winning on average 32% of the vote, while in the Western states, it was more like 17% of the vote. One person is curious what role younger voters might have played in the rise of the AfD, and whether first-time voters perhaps contributed to the success of the party.
Yes, I think you can really no longer say that the AfD is particularly popular or successful in any constituency, but they have broadened their votership pretty much along all different strands of life and all age groups. They were most successful this time with 30 to 44-year-olds, which is where they came in. As if it was only this group voting, they would have been the strongest party. But they're also very popular with younger voters, and we've seen that already in the European elections last year and in other regional elections. That younger voters really tend to vote for them. They still, as I said earlier, they still draw from people who have previously not voted. They still draw particularly from blue-collar voters. They are less popular amongst the older generation, the 65-plus year olds. But I think these differences are all sort of leveling up. I mean, even among people in Germany who have come from migrant families, they are more and more popular. So I think that's part of the development that we have to watch very closely, that in a way, though, as fringe as they may be in their positions, they are not fringe when it comes to their supporters.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess the other question is obviously in the last few weeks, we've seen some statements from people like Elon Musk about the AfD. We've seen comments by Vice President J.D. Vance and even the meeting between him and Alice Weidel. What impact do you think the interaction by U.S. political leaders like Musk and Vance have had for the AfD, which is, not necessarily a pro-American party? I mean, I'm even having a hard time sort of reconciling where the AfD stands when it comes to this.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't overestimate it now. I think, of course, it was nice for Alice Weidel to have that stage with Elon Musk on X, but it comes down to like a couple of 100,000 viewers on X. X in Germany is not a very popular platform, not like in the United States. I think it's like something between 10 and 20% of Germans who do have an X account in Germany. It's not like other European countries or not like the United States. You cannot win an election just by being good on X. You cannot win an election just by being good on TikTok, though it's increasingly important. So I think for now, it's not that significant. I think the significance of Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference was rather that we see that the AfD is part of a populist international movement that tend to try to support each other. and that has now, of course, gained a lot of power with the American president being part of this populist movement. And I think it may have an effect in the future because we can see Vance and the American government pushing for liberalization of German digital laws, who still restrict what can be said on X and other social media platforms. Other than the United States, the European Union has very strong legislation in place with the Digital Services Act, and Elon Musk is currently in conflict with the Digital Services Act. There is an investigation against him in Brussels. And I think if the United States is able to push for a relaxation of the rules here in Germany, who already are not functioning very well. We can see that the algorithms both on X and TikTok are very much benefiting far-right parties here in Germany too. This may have like a longer-term effect to the benefit of the AfD. But for the moment, I would say it did not change the election results.
So I have two sort of other domestic questions that maybe get into election minutia, but one of them is that if you look at the numbers together, the Free Democrats not making it in, Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht not making it in, and the Sonstige or other voters, there are almost 15% of voters whose votes are not going to be represented in the Bundestag. Is that a topic of discussion in Germany right now?
Yes, I mean, in a way it always is, because of course, the 5% hurdle is a very specific German thing. We do not have that in other European countries. We do not have it when we vote for the European Parliament. And it's, of course, for historic reasons, because there is a fear of like an atomization of the German party landscape. But of course, the number of them, as it splinters anyway, the number of votes that are are not counted. They're counted, but who do not make it to the Bundestag is becoming bigger. And I think right now it's not that big of a topic. I think it's not very surprising that the Liberals have not made it in after their performance in the traffic light coalition. And I think as well for the BSW, they were only founded a little bit over a year ago. I think the 4.97% they got right now are a great success for this party to make it this far within a year and sort of losing their topic just a couple of weeks ahead of the elections, with Donald Trump saying, well, let's talk to the Russians. So yeah, but yes, of course, you can still debate whether that's good for Germany's democracy. But I think in any case, this is nothing. We will not get rid of the 5% hurdle anytime soon, I think.
No, I mean, I think the 5% clause will certainly stay. As a indication of trying to create greater stability, as you say, because of the lessons of history. But it is interesting when you think about the debate over the AfD and their sort of inclusion in government or not, and then that another sort of segment of society is sort of left out, even though they've participated in democracy and in the democratic process, and that leads to a fundamental debate about the health of democracy. And this comes at the same time as Germany has introduced some changes to the election law, in an effort to reduce the size of the Bundestag. I think there were 723 members currently, and the new Bundestag will only have 630 members. And this is an effort to sort of really streamline the work of the Bundestag. But what it means concretely as a result of this election is that more than 20, I think 23 individuals who were elected to the Bundestag will not get seats in the Bundestag. And they come largely from the Christian Democrats, but there are also some CSU and Bavaria representatives, and even some AfD and some Social Democrats who are not going to make it into the Bundestag. To what degree is that something that people are talking about? Or is it just people are accepting the new election law and hoping for the best?
I don't think the CDU will accept it, and Friedrich Merz has already announced that he will try to take it back. I'm not sure whether they will get the majority to do that, because at the same time, of course, you would have to come up with another solution, because the very large, over 700 seat Bundestag was very unpopular with Germans too, and it was constantly criticized for the cost, for the inefficiency. So I think it still is a very popular thing to reduce the number. But as you said, it's of course very difficult to exclude people who were directly elected to the Bundestag, not via some party list, but really directly voted for in their constituencies, to deny them a seat in parliament.
Mm-hmm. So let's, finally, as we come to a close, get to sort of the foreign policy dimension of all of this and what the foreign policy under Friedrich Merz could look like. We just received a question from somebody who writes, Friedrich Merz sounded rather confrontational vis-a-vis the United States during the Elefantenrunde when all of the chancellor candidates met after the election. Was this just rhetoric, or do you think that there's more behind this stance of Friedrich Merz?
No, I think that after the Munich Security Conference, there's a broad agreement within Europe that, of course, that Europe has to step up, that it has to offer something to Donald Trump, especially with regard to Ukraine, be it troops or more aid or taking more responsibility. But at the same time, that Europe won't be bullied. And I think that's pretty much what Friedrich Merz wanted to express. And I also think that his first statements after Vance's speech, after Pete Hegseth's appearance in Brussels, was him saying, this is a historic moment, and we will have to be more independent of the United States. And of course, he and everybody else knows that we can't do this from one day to the other, and that there won't be European military autonomy anytime soon. But it's certainly something that he will work towards. And I think while he is confrontational, speaking to the German public, and that he will certainly draw red lines in the direct conversations with the American government too. They are, of course, seeking for contacts. And I think that's something that everybody in Europe is currently struggling with, is who do you talk to, and who is really in the loop, who gets to take a decision, and isn't it all, after all, handed up to Donald Trump himself? Europeans view the American government as a very centrist government, where even the foreign minister, the vice president, senior senators, and party members, people, I don't know, like the national security advisor, are not able to take decisions on their own or to influence really the politics of the big guy at the top. So I think they are working their way towards it. And I think it's going to be an interesting question of how cooperative will be the Scholz government will be in that transition period, to do that alongside with the team coming in to the chancellery and then to the new to the foreign ministry. I think it will be a good thing if they cooperated. I'm currently not so sure they will.
And that sort of leads to a more immediate question, if you will, which is just next week on March 6th, there will be a special EU summit on the future of Ukraine and on European security, and undoubtedly the transatlantic partnership and the future of the transatlantic partnership will be an important agenda item at that summit. And I guess in this transitional period, who will represent Germany is sort of the open question. Is it the outgoing caretaker government? To what degree will Friedrich Merz and his team be involved in that?
I think that remains to be seen. What I hear is that cooperation so far, or that so far the Scholz government doesn't seem too open to cooperate closely with Merz's designated foreign policy team. It is certainly Scholz who is going. That's just protocol. He's still the chancellor, and he will be until the Bundestag votes for a new chancellor, which won't be probably won't be before it won't be before we have a coalition treaty. So somewhere in late April, early May, maybe. So he will represent Germany in Brussels. And I think, unfortunately, that means that Germany will not be able to take any radical decisions. And I think one of the things that are very concretely on the table in Brussels right now is Ursula von der Leyen's proposal to smoothen European debt rules, to exclude investments in defense. And that, of course, is the very key core point of contestation of this new government. So I don't really see Germany taking a concrete and solid position on that before they have some sort of idea of where their coalition talks are going. This, to me, is a very depressing prospect, because I think it would be very important that Germany's out there right now. I'm sort of skeptic that it's really going to happen. And I think what people in Merz's foreign policy team are currently rather looking at is the NATO summit in The Hague in June. They know they have to present some sort of package to Donald Trump. Then talk is of 1 percentage point more than we spend right now, which is around 35 billion euros. A lot of money for the German household. And right now, what I hear is that they're glad they're going to make it until June.
Well, on that note, Anna, herzlichen Dank. This was a great discussion, and I really appreciate your taking the time on the day after the election to sort of help us understand all of the nuances of what happened yesterday and give us some things to think about in the days and weeks ahead. Many, many thanks.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.